Hello, dear friends. Today is May 18th, 2026. Before we get to the map and break down everything that happened over the past 24 hours, I want to say a few words about what is going on in the world beyond the Ukrainian theater of operations, because these events directly affect the broader geopolitical situation and how much longer the current conflict will last. The Strait of Hormuz, the global economy hooked on Tehran. Negotiations between Washington and Tehran continue to stall, and with each passing day, it becomes clearer that there will be no quick resolution. Last week, Trump publicly called the latest Iranian proposal totally unacceptable and stupid. That is not diplomatic language. That is the language of a man who has been thoroughly pushed to his limit. Iranian President Pezeshkian responded by declaring that Tehran will never bow its head, and that it is entering negotiations not to surrender but to defend national interests. Classic Eastern rhetoric, simultaneously no and but we can talk. The core of the dispute is straightforward. The United States wants one thing: for Iran to fully dismantle its nuclear program, ship its entire stockpile of highly enriched uranium abroad, and shut down its underground facilities. In return, unfreezing of assets, partial sanctions relief, and a diplomatic settlement. Tehran, on the other hand, demands the lifting of the naval blockade on its ports as a precondition for any serious negotiations, plus war reparations, plus sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. In essence, the Iranian side is trying to turn the logic of negotiations upside down. Give us everything first, then we'll talk about the nuclear issue. Trump rejects that logic outright and even suspended Operation Freedom, the American naval mission to escort commercial vessels through the strait, citing progress in negotiations that in practice turned out to be quite limited. In parallel, he threatened to resume bombing if a deal is not reached. His latest post on the subject reads roughly as follows: "For Iran, the clock is ticking. They had better get moving, fast, or there won't be anything left of them." Meanwhile, as both sides trade rhetoric, the global economy is absorbing real losses. Under normal conditions, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. According to estimates from the International Energy Agency, Iran's blockade has removed around 10 million barrels per day from the market, the largest disruption in oil supply in all of modern history. Brent crude has already exceeded $100 a barrel, compared to 73 before the conflict began. The United States and China are jointly trying to plug the gap. American oil exports have surged, and Beijing has agreed to buy more from Washington rather than from Middle Eastern suppliers. At the Trump-Xi summit, both leaders agreed on one thing: the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened. But exactly when? Nobody knows. One interesting detail: Iran is simultaneously developing its own paid transit mechanism for the strait, available only to friendly countries. In effect, Tehran wants to turn Hormuz into a toll road with a checkpoint at the entrance. European states, by all appearances, are already quietly negotiating with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for safe passage of their vessels. Sanctions are sanctions, but trade is trade. Nothing new under the sun. What does all of this mean for the Ukrainian conflict? The connection is direct. While Washington is tangled up in the Middle Eastern knot, diplomatic pressure on Moscow objectively diminishes. Trump needs at least one foreign policy win right now, and Hormuz matters more to him at this moment than Donbass. That is worth keeping in mind whenever you read between the lines of any statement about peace in Ukraine. And now, to the map. Let us go to the front, Julipole direction. We start in the south. After Russian forces established control over Sharivin, the momentum did not stop. It pushed out in two directions simultaneously: northward toward Novosilki and eastward toward Bilohiria and Luhivske. On Bilohiria, caution is warranted here. The settlement is already marked on the map as presumably under Russian control, and there is a basis for that. Earlier, forward positions of the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, in this area were struck by Russian FPV teams, and there is footage to confirm it. That said, not a single Ukrainian source has yet confirmed the loss of Bilohiria. So we leave a question mark here and resist the urge to color it in. The map is a working tool, but sometimes it runs ahead of reality. On Novosilki, the situation is dynamic. Russian forces appear to be continuing to consolidate in the surrounding area, Reports about expanding the control zone have been coming in for several days now, and today's data point to ongoing heavy fighting in the district. Russian forces are also maintaining pressure on AFU positions directly in Julipole and its surroundings, moving slightly north, Verkhnya Tersa and Vozdvizhivka, two settlements where, according to Russian sources, counter-engagements are now taking place, meaning the AFU is not merely defending but actively attempting to push back. On Verkhnya Tersa, Russian forces entered the central part some time ago, but how much ground they have managed to consolidate since then remains unclear. There is information about the front line being straightened between Tsivitkove and Verkhnya Tersa, and today some confirmation of movement on this stretch has emerged. Vozdvizhivka is the more interesting picture. Yesterday, footage arrived from two separate points. Russian forces advanced 2.5 kilometers and took up positions in the central part of the settlement. This is no longer just hanging on to the eastern outskirts. This is genuine penetration into the interior. Today, information appeared about yet another sector that has passed under Russian control. If the AFU cannot organize a counterattack and dislodge Russian forces from both settlements, and the window for that is narrowing with every hour, then Verkhnya Tersa and Vozdvizhivka will in all likelihood fall fully under Russian control within the coming days. That opens the road to Lyubitska, through which supply lines to Orikhiv run. Strategically, a meaningful piece of ground. Kupansk direction, Borova, the main story of the past 24 hours. Now to what I personally consider the most significant development of the past day. I am talking about Borova, a small urban-type settlement that for a long time functioned as a true stronghold on this section of the front. A reminder of the context. The day before yesterday, Chief of the General Staff Gerasimov visited the headquarters of the Western grouping and made a series of statements, including a claim about the capture of Borova. Skepticism was warranted, mine included, because this stretch of the front had remained almost completely static for extended periods. The reason was not any weakness on the Russian side, but a specific opponent. Borova is held by elite units of the Azov regiment, not the kind of men who are being rounded up on the streets these days by military commissariat vans. These are people who know how to fight, professionally, hard, and with their heads. And yet yesterday, footage of objective control arrived. Not just reports, actual footage, geolocated to specific coordinates. Russian fighters were confirmed present on Skidna and Centralna streets in the eastern part of Borova. The advance from the previous line of contact measured an impressive 4.5 kilometers. For a sector that had been considered dead for months on end, this is a very serious result. Does this mean Borova has been taken? No. Confirming a presence on the eastern outskirts is only a beginning. Moreover, from available indications, Russian fighters have penetrated considerably deeper than just the outskirts. There are hints of additional footage to come that will confirm a more substantial advance into the settlement. We wait. But even if tomorrow brings footage from the center or the western edge, that still would not mean full and indisputable control over the settlement. Because Borova is not just its built-up area. There are also the forests. To the northwest, a tree line more than 4 kilometers wide. To the southwest, a forest known as Borovska Dacha, more than 6 kilometers wide. In total, roughly 10 kilometers of woodland between the settlement and the Oskil River, all of which must be cleared before anyone can speak of truly ironclad control. That is a significant task, and it still lies ahead. On Kuchkivka, part of the settlement has been under Russian control since January, visible on the map. For the remainder, no objective control footage has arrived, so a question mark remains. On Shikivka, control over half the settlement was claimed, but not a single confirming video has appeared so far. We wait. Interim summary for the Kupiansk direction. The 1st Tank Army has broken through Azov's defenses on the eastern approaches to Borova. That is a confirmed fact. How deep and sustainable that breach will prove to be, the next few days will tell. Kupiansk direction. No map changes here yet, but there is an important point to register. Yesterday, geolocated objective control footage arrived. Russian fighters are confirmed present in the western part of a small woodland tract located to the west of the village of Kalaniki. In other words, that tract has passed under Russian control. Why does this matter? Because directly to the north of Rye-Oleksandrivka lies a large forested area that is the key to that settlement. Rye-Oleksandrivka is a tough nut. The AFU is holding there, and frontal assaults have so far failed to dislodge them. But Russian forces are now literally 700 to 800 meters from the entrance to that strategically significant forest. If Russian fighters succeed in entering it, and I have no doubt they will, and take it under control, the AFU garrison in Rye-Oleksandrivka will find itself in an extremely uncomfortable position. The flanking envelopment tactic is working here in exactly that manner. Zaparigia direction, the hardest sector. Here the picture differs from everywhere else along the front, and it differs to Russian forces' disadvantage. Russian forces have withdrawn from Primorsk. Ukrainian forces have fully re-established control over the settlement. The AFU is now using Primorsk as a springboard to press against Plavny, the next line. Simultaneously, fighting continues for Stepnohursk. Half of the urban settlement is no longer under Russian control, and the battle is now being fought for its southern portion. According to some reports, even there no stable Russian control remains as such. The only sector where Russian fighters are holding confidently is the 3rd residential district, the zone of multi-story apartment buildings. That is where the current defensive line runs. The Zaporizhzhia direction is currently the only stretch of the entire front where the AFU is conducting not localized skirmishes, but large-scale, resource-intensive attacks with everything they have available. That needs to be understood clearly. In recent episodes, I have already spoken about the prospects for the summer campaign. The primary task for the Dnipro grouping on this sector is to hold. Not to advance, not to expand the control zone, but simply to hold the present positions and prevent any withdrawal across the river. Because if Russian forces retreat beyond the Dnipro, every gain since 2025 will be erased. The stakes are high, and the fighters there know it. Sumy direction. The Sumy sector also carries news today, and on balance it is positive from the standpoint of Russian advances. Starting from the southern portion, Russian forces are expanding the control zone across the triangle of Novodmitrivka, Taratutine, Pokrovka. There is information about the front line being leveled between Pokrovka and Novodmitrivka. But at the time of recording, no movement has been confirmed on the map. No supporting materials have arrived yet. As a reminder, the most recent footage from this area recorded a Russian advance of 2.5 kilometers. Novodmitrivka itself remains under AFU control. Russian forces have consolidated on the eastern portion, but no further movement inside the settlement has been confirmed. On Andriivka, an interesting moment. This settlement was already colored on my map in favor of Russian forces, but at some point the situation evidently changed. The settlement slipped into a grey zone, and we missed that moment. Today, 2 video materials arrived as confirmation. Russian forces advanced more than 600 meters and established new positions within the residential built-up area. The fact that the reporting describes an advance, rather than a defense, directly indicates that Andriivka had been in a genuinely contested status beforehand. Kondraovka. Active combat operations are underway, but no confirmed movement is being recorded at the time of this episode. Russian forces are striking AFU positions in the area of Novosich, Krapovshchina, and Maryin. On Yunakovka, information about an expanding control zone, although much of the surrounding territory was already colored following yesterday's update. Separately, Sopish. Yesterday, footage arrived from this settlement. Russian forces expanded their control zone by approximately 700 meters. And today, the first reports are coming in of movement from Sopich toward Bachivsk and Mala Slobidka. No confirmation yet, but as regular viewers know from this channel's track record, confirming footage typically arrives 2 to 3 days after the initial reports. Worth keeping in mind, overall assessment, the past 24 hours were eventful. The centerpiece is Borova. This is not a routine kilometer gained across open steppe. This is a breach of elite Azov defenses on a sector that was considered impenetrable for years. 4.5 kilometers into the positions of one of Ukraine's best formations. That is a result. How well it holds and what the next footage shows remains to be seen. The Zaporizhzhia sector remains the zone of highest tension. the only place on the entire front where initiative currently rests with the AFU. All other directions, Sumy, Julipole, Sloviansk, present the picture of a slow but systematic compression of Ukrainian defensive lines. That is all for today. If the material was useful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. YouTube actively suppresses the reach of content in this category, so your engagement under the video is not a formality. It is real, practical support. Until the next episode.